Now, Philip, most of your family were involved in this Northern Ireland revolution, we call it at the time. We'll start with your mother.
My mother was Margaret Ann McGuinness. Her mother was Margaret McLean, and her brother was Alfred McLean. Alfred McLean was the first General Secretary of the Irish Transport and Joining Workers Union in Belfast. It was James Connolly's election in 1907. My grandmother was also involved with James Connolly at that time, and my grandfather McGuinness was also involved with James Connolly at that time, and he was the head of the Dockers branch of the Irish Transport and Joining Workers Union in Belfast. And the family, on my recollection, starts from there basically. There's other history going back further, but that's the important part. And they worked with Connolly, and they built up the Irish Transport and Joining Workers Union in Belfast. Alfie McLean remained the General Secretary for years and years after it. And my mother's best friend, who was her bridesmaid at her marriage in 1933, was Winifred Carney, who was James Connolly's secretary. That's how far back that would go. In 1920, up to 1920s, after the revolution of 1916, and Sinn Féin came out on sort of as the main party after James Connolly was executed. My mother and my grandmother joined Sinn Féin and worked within Sinn Féin and worked within the Common Bond. My grandmother would have been familiar with people like Countess Markovich and John Lavery's wife, Lady Gregory, and all those people. She would have been familiar with them as being high up in Common Bond. My grandmother was also the officer commanding the Common Bond in Belfast during the War of Independence and during the Civil War. Would have been very, very close to Frank Egan. Very close to Frank Egan. He was Chief of Staff over the North of Ireland. So that would have been our background. In 1926, David Earle was arrested in the North and got 3 months from imprisonment in Crumlin Road for membership of Sinn Féin, fighting in the election in Southdown, and I think he got 3 months in the jail. But during that period, my mother and my grandmother looked after his affairs in relation to food and washing and various things like that. And when he got out of prison, he told my mother everything would be all right. But then he turned around and he denounced Sinn Féin and he formed Fianna Fáil. And at that stage, all resistance and all people who thought that there was anything to be gained closed down. There was nothing for us to fight for after 1926. The Sinn Féin organisation in the North died, and it became a sort of a cult organisation rather than a massive political organisation, what it was before that. And people like Joe Devlin and others took over the mantle as the Irish Nationalist Party, and they took their seats in Stormont, which Sinn Féin would never have done. And they recognised partition, which Sinn Féin never did. So Sinn Féin became sort of, at that stage, written off. And my mother just went on about her life because she had lost the love of her life in 1924 in Mountjoy Jail when they executed Joe McKelvey. And she never got married. She met my father, his father was killed in the Battle of the Somme as a member of the Munster Fusiliers, because he was an Irish volunteer. He followed Redmond, and he went and fought in the First World War under the Home Rule thing. My father was on the IRA at that time in the late 18s, right through to 24, 25, 26, and he worked in the Irish News as a printer. And my mother married him in 1933, and she had 9 children. And she went on from that period to raise her children and to build her business and to get us the best education that she could get for us. They both of them worked extremely hard under very difficult and trying circumstances. And the end result of her work was that I have 2 sisters who were nuns. I have a sister who qualified as a nurse. I have another sister who worked in the civil service. John and Billy were both marine engineers. Oliver was a solicitor. Jimmy was a cost accountant. And I worked in the family business. And that was the kind of family that we would have came from. That would have been our background, semi-professional and professional.
And what kind of involvement did your mother have in the Sinn Féin set-up at the time?
She would have been in charge of Sinn Féin in Belfast. My grandmother was the head of Sinn Féin for the North of Ireland. My grandfather McLean, my grandmother McLean, and my mother would have been her right-hand person, and Winnie Carney. But they weren't mad left socialists. They were democratic socialists. They would have been in the form of James Connolly of working for people's rights and trade unionism and all that sort of stuff. That was where they would have been coming from. And violence wouldn't have been their first option, and then, as I'll prove later on, violence wasn't their first option. Violence became the very last option.
And were they in charge of the men?
No,
Just the women. Coming them on, yeah. And were they involved in action, or were the coming them on involved in action, or were they a support group?
There was a support group. They ran medical situations, and they ran moving guns and moving arms and that sort of stuff. Very few of them would have been on the front line. It wasn't like the coming upon over the 70s, where you had coming upon on the front line. You didn't have at that time. Didn't come upon the front line. Countess Margovich was more involved in trying to get after 1916. Her whole thing was create support for army men and on their own and all that sort of stuff.
So your mother got entangled in the trouble after 69?
No, my mother,
She got shot, did she?
She was shot in 1981 and she died in 1983.
Yeah.
She was shot 5 times and 4 bullets remained in her, and one of the bullets moved in 1983 into her pancreas and she died as a result.
And what were the circumstances of her shooting?
She was going to Mass on the hunger strikes, on Bobby Sands hunger strike, and she was walking down Uniontown Street to Uniontown Chapel, and 2 individuals drove up on a motorbike and shot her dead. Well, shot her. She died subsequently of the things. What they were trying to do was, Billy was walking with her, and there was a group of them. They jumped off the motorbike, and Mommy stepped in front of Billy, and they shot Mommy.
So she stepped in to protect him?
Yes.
And he wasn't shot at all, no?
No.
And was she very serious? Was she in hospital for a long time after that?
She was, and she got 5 bullets into her, and they could only remove one of them. There was 4 of them they couldn't remove.
Okay.
And one of the bullets that they couldn't remove in 1983, in April 1983, on the 13th of April 1983, it moved into her pancreas and she died as a result.
And did she play a support role in the post-69 time?
Yes.
From her house?
Well, in 1956, the story of that would be that Mommy, from 1926 to 1956, I can't talk too much about that in between period. All I know is Mommy reared the family, educated us with Daddy. It wasn't a question of just Mommy, that it was Mommy and it was 2 of them. And they ran the business and they worked hard and they got us, because what my mother used to say to us, and Daddy used to say to us too, the route from poverty is through education. It's not through anything else.
Still holds today.
Yeah.
Still holds today.
And that was drilled into us very young. And even today, I keep telling my own children that. I have 2 children at the moment. One's in teaching in Brazil, and I have another girl over in London doing a master's, and I have another girl coming out of St Pat's this week as a trained secondary school teacher. And the only thing that they can do is education, and that extracts them from poverty, and it gives them a standard of living and a standard of education that removes them on. And my mother always drove that into us. That was the important thing. So her driving force was education, and she got that from Connolly, and it was Connolly who drove that into my mother.
So she was a fearless woman then, was she?
Oh yeah.
Fearless?
Fearless, absolutely fearless. But a very proud woman. Stood proud.
Did something happen in your house one night?
Well, in 1956, Billy and John were arrested. John was arrested in County Tyrone on their own. He was in a flying column with a guy from Cork and another guy from Lurgan, a guy called John Madden from Cork. And he was arrested in outside Cookstown, between Dungiven and Cookstown, a place called Donaman. And he was arrested and brought to Crumlin Road Jail, and he got 8 years for membership of the area and having arms. Billy was arrested about 3 weeks later outside the General Post Office in Belfast and was brought to Crumlin Road Jail and interned. And at that period up in Belfast Jail, there was a large number of southern men who were sentenced to long terms imprisonment, and our house became the catalyst for that. So what my mother did, because we could afford to do it, was we supplied all the fruit and vegetable all the fruit parcels. They were allowed £3 of fruit a week. So all the Southern Irish prisoners got a parcel, and that parcel came from our house. At my mother's expense. There was never any money got for anything else. This was just something she did. Along with a large salad, which went to the jail every Saturday. And that went on for years, and our house was constantly being raided by the RUC and the beach specials, constantly. But when people came from the south, they would have stayed in our house. Because they would have come up and took 6 or 7 visits at a time. They let the visits build up over 6 months. So they'd come up and stayed with us, and then they would have had their visits and then went back again. Especially people from Cork and Kerry. Like Dennis Foley's parents would have come up, Johnny Madden's probably, Tony Cooney, people like that, and Willie Goff, and Paddy Hodgins, and Dachy O'Connell, and all those people that came to our house, and they would have stayed in our house. So that was part of the support group that we would have ran in the house. And then when J.B. O'Hagan and Daithí O'Connor were shot in Loughney when they were caught, and they were brought to Musgrave Park Hospital, my sister Rita, who was a nurse in the city hospital, found out about it, and my mother tramped up the whole way to Musgrave Park Hospital into the ward, into the boys, to make sure they were all right and make sure they got the word to their families that they were safe and well.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing that my mother would have done.
Really good support stuff.
Yes, and that was the background of our family, and it was all done quietly.
In later times, something happened to our house as well.
Well, the house was blown up.
Why?
Eventually. Well, I was arrested.
Yeah.
And they what they did was they identified where I lived, where Mommy lived, and the UVF came up with British Army support, and they put a bomb in the hall. But when they left the house, they left the front door open, and where we lived, we had a 3-story bay-windowed house, and the hall. When you come in through the door, you went down 3 steps into the back of the house, which was another sitting room, kitchen, pantry, cooking area. In the hallway, you had a parlour in there and a small sitting room there. And they left the bomb in the hall. But when they left the bomb in the hall, they ran out of the house and left the front door open. So instead of the bomb blowing in that way, the bomb blew out that way. And my mommy was down here in the basement, semi-basement of the house. If that bomb had went that way, she was dead.
Yeah.
But the bomb went that way. But it blew out the front of the house. And we lost a lot. We lost a lot of records, a lot of pictures. And you know, I have one picture that I have that I'm very proud of. It's the photograph of Winnie Carney as my mother's bridesmaid in 1933.
And did she stay in the house after? Or did you move out?
No, we moved. My another sister was in America, came home. I was home at that time, and I bought another house, so she went to live with her. And then she bought a house then. When she got the insurance money for the house that was blown up from the British government, she bought a house down the street, a smaller house, which she lived in until she died.